Good evening, everybody. It's nice to see so many friendly faces. As you probably read in the Pygmy Owl, our special guest speaker tonight is RJ Baltierra. And just briefly, RJ is a WSU grad in zoology, a field biologist, lifelong birder, was the field trip coordinator for Loose Audubon for a while. And tonight he's going to share his experiences with the hawkwatch in Corpus Christi, which if any of you have experienced that, it's pretty special. So looking forward to that. And what was not in the article, I think bears discussion. RJ has been a tremendous asset to the local and regional birding community with his observations, which we see all the time in the field notes article, and as best I can tell, he started doing that like February of 2013. So 9 years or more. So I'd just like to say thank you so much for your contributions, greatly appreciated. And thank you for your time this evening. We're looking forward to getting to know you better.
Well, thank you. That's awesome. I'm glad my sightings help out. I'm glad people are able to see what I see sometimes, and I always love posting about it. So I'm glad people are getting out and enjoying the birds like I am. So thank you. All right. Let me get this up. All right. So this is hawk watching in Texas. This photo right here really kind of epitomizes, what hawk watching in Texas is like, right? This is where people go to Texas specifically to hawk watch, or these massive kettles of broad-winged hawks. Already had a really awesome introduction there, so yeah, I don't really need to go over me about a bunch, but I included some fun photos here. I'm sure some of you have heard and may have heard before we started here of my selfie with sharp-shinned hawk here. I still to this day have no idea why it landed on my head, but it fortunately let me take some selfies with it. It was absolutely incredible. Here in the middle is me with a rough-legged hawk. A friend of mine was doing his PhD work on it, and I was able to help him out with that a couple times. It was really cool. And then on the right here is what we call hawkwatch chic. This is what we wear when the hawk watching gets a little cold and wet. So, I mean, I'm sure some of you are already aware of what a hawk watch is, but I figured I'd go over the basics of it. Essentially, it's a group of volunteers, usually up on a ridge line or a coastline, anywhere these migrants concentrate, and they're up there counting these migrant raptors, which are diurnal raptors because they migrate using thermals. They're often conducted in the fall and the spring when migration is going. Typically in the fall because migration is a bit more concentrated then rather than in the spring, but there are some sites in the spring that they do counts at. Essentially, hawk watching provides a really cheap and effective way for gathering long-term population data on quite a few species of migratory raptors, which many of the species in the United States are migratory. They're also a great place for education and outreach. So in 2018, I was hired by Hawkwatch International, which is a nonprofit organization which runs many of these hawk watches, mainly in the Western US, but they also partner with a site in Mexico. I was there for 3 months and 2 weeks in Corpus Christi, Texas. down in the coastal bend, pretty far south. I'll show you a map in a minute. But essentially, my job was to count raptors as they passed the site, aid in recording the data to hawkwatcher.org, which is a really cool website. I encourage people to check it out. Especially in the fall when all the hawk watches are going, you can actually see the hawk count data live, and it'll, species by species data, and it's really a great way to get into hawk watching. And then, of course, I greet and educate visitors. Excuse me. So the map here kind of shows various sites from across the country that Hawkwatch International runs. As you can see, there's actually a site here in Washington called Chelan Ridge, and some of you might be familiar with it. So why are these sites ideal for migration? Well, as I mentioned before, these raptors use thermals to migrate. Thermals are just, the sun heating up the land, forming these updrafts, and these birds circle up using them, and then they stream, and that saves them energy from, that way they don't have to flap the whole way there to Mexico or wherever they're going. So it's really dependent on where these thermals are really good, and also natural barriers. So mountain ridge lines are a big barrier because a lot of times these birds can't fly over them, and in a lot of places they'll actually get funneled through these ridge lines. And so they pick these sites where these migrants get concentrated so that they can get a real grasp of the entire, or at least a good portion of the population of these raptors that are migrating by. They're also based on, like how easy is it to get to these places and the ease of viewing, because you want a good view of the horizon, the sky, everything, so you can make sure that you're counting as many raptors as you can. So the other big barrier with raptor migration is water, because thermals can't really form over water because water absorbs the heat from the sun, so they get the updrafts that you do over land. So raptor migration is mostly over land. So the Corpus Christi Hawkwatch site is situated right here in the pretty much like about halfway down the coastal bend of Texas. And you can see here why raptors get piled up there. Is the Gulf of Mexico, one of the biggest barriers for these migratory raptors in the US. So we get birds from the central and eastern flyway mainly. I wouldn't be surprised if birds from the west are ending up over here because of some of these mountains that are down in Mexico. So the Hawkwatch site itself is situated in a public park called Hazel Bazemore. It's about 17 miles west of the city of Corpus Christi. It's actually situated at the highest point in the county, which is a whopping 97 feet. It's like a little mini ridge line within this park. And the other reason why it's there is because Corpus Christi Bay forms yet another pretty big barrier for these raptors coming down the coastal bend, heading down to Mexico. So they often have to come down, they see the bay, and they turn and go around the bay. That's not always the case, but a lot of it has to do with wind as well, which wind off the bay is quite a bit. So they get blown over or they turn over the park, and that's where we are counting the raptors. So this Hawkwatch started in 1997. The reason it was started there was because a lot of the people there were noting these huge numbers of raptors. And so they decided to start a full season of hawk watching there to really get a grasp on these numbers. And they were right. In the first season, they ended up with 800,000 plus birds. By 7 years later, they had over 1 million birds in a season. When I say a season, I'm just talking like August through November. And greater than 90% of these birds are broad-winged hawks, which are, if you're not familiar with that species, and I'll show you some pictures later, it's a smaller buteo, so a smaller hawk, very kind of similar in structure to red tails, but smaller. And most of the migrants that come through there are broadwings. Um, excuse me. But we also get pretty big numbers of kites, big numbers of vultures. I think vultures is our second most numerous bird, but it's still very small in compared to the broad-winged hawks. Um, the other thing that makes this place so special is because of how south it is, we get a real high diversity of raptors. We get a lot of the southern specialties, like Harris's hawk and black vultures and white-tailed hawk, crested caracaras. And if you don't know what these birds are, there will be pictures, I promise. But yeah, it is the most diverse and numerous count north of Mexico. So to start off, a typical day at the watch, it's usually me and 3 other counters. 1 or 2 of them are Dane and Libby, which they're an older couple that lives there in Corpus Christi. They're super cool. They've been volunteering at the watch for a long time, and now they run it. And they actually got married on the Hawkwatch platform, which is this building porch-like thing that you see up in the upper right here. So they run the watch, and that's who leads the whole thing. They also hired 2 other counters, and so it's usually us out there. So a typical day is just scanning and scanning and scanning and lots of scanning. If you're not scanning, then you're not doing your job, essentially. I mean, the only time you're not scanning is when you're just counting birds or you're greeting someone, which happens a lot at this hawk watch because of how easy it is to get to. Since it's in a public park, literally people could just drive up, park up, and walk right up there and hawk watch with us if they wanted to. And that's what people do. During slow days, when we're not counting these big numbers, we're often practicing for when those big numbers come, usually by counting other migratory birds like anhingas and American white pelicans, which come by that over the hawk watch by the thousands. So they're a great candidate for practicing counting on. We're also constantly taking note of resident birds, like, is there a local red-tailed hawk, a local white-tailed hawk, who's staying around, what are the birds that we shouldn't be counting, and oftentimes they're pretty obvious because they're not flying really high and overhead. So, but a lot of times they'll go up and greet the migrants too, which immediately, it's a resident. Obviously, hawk watching is very weather dependent. We're not going to be out during rainy days, which we actually did have quite a few towards the later half, believe it or not. But most of the time there, it was very hot and humid. Great for raptor migration. The bottom right here is a picture of basically a great day for hawk watching. Very high cloud deck means we can spot birds a lot easier. And obviously the heat and humidity makes for great thermals. So yeah, this is the view on the bottom right from the Hawkwatch platform. You can see this is over Hazel Bazemore Park. We have a road that goes around the outer edge there, and there's this pond down at the lower left. It's super birdie park. We have a water drip right below the deck and feeders all around the deck. So whenever it's slow, there's plenty of things to look at. And then the last thing I want to add is that the hawk watching community there is amazing. There's a lot of people there that volunteer their time and know more than even I did by a mile because they had been volunteering there for years. A lot of really local expert and a lot of really great help. And they were all really awesome people down there. So if you're ever down there, I encourage you to stop by, especially, of course, during the migration. So I figured I'd kind of go by a month by month kind of what it was like there. So August was my first full month there. I was there for 2 weeks just by myself with Dane and Libby, because that early in the season they don't get really huge numbers. We're mainly there hoping to see swallow-tailed kites, which I have pictured here in the upper middle here. A very beautiful raptor that migrates through that area, not in super huge numbers, but I think we recorded probably about nearly 200 birds. Really awesome. Obviously, the main migrant we're looking for in August is Mississippi kite, below that swallow-tailed kite. Mississippi kites peak about the end of August and into early September. We average about 12,000. We didn't have a really huge start to the watch, but I ended up with like 50 life birds within like the first week, because of all the South Texas specialties, which you'll hear me say that a lot. It's basically just birds that nowhere else in the US you can find. And Corpus Christi is right on the northern range for a lot of these species. One of them being this beautiful green jay, which was super common. They were in front of the Hawkwatch platform just about every day, coming down to our drip or whatever. Really obnoxious birds too, but super beautiful. They actually replace the blue jay, which is the common eastern bird, but once you get that far south, it turns into green jays, which are just spectacular. We also had a gray hawk, which was only the second one ever. I wasn't able to get a photo of it, but it was really cool to see. Usually they're only found in the Rio Grande Valley, so it was really special to see one that far north. We actually ended the month well behind in Mississippi kites, but we had good numbers of swallow-tailed kites. On the right here is one of our local crested caracaras, which is a bizarre falcon. If you can believe it's a falcon. They scavenge. They're actually not really active hunters, although they'll take snakes and stuff too. But I've actually got a photo of them with French fries in the beak, so I'm not entirely sure what they really like. So here's a nice collection of photos here from my time in August. Some of my favorites, some South Texas specialties like this bird right here, which is a white-tipped dove. And then below that, we have a buff-bellied hummingbird. And then to the right of that is a green kingfisher. There's 3 species of kingfisher down in South Texas. There's green, belted, and ringed. And green is the smallest and ringed is the biggest. And I got to see all 3. It's really cool. Up here is a yellow-billed cuckoo that was migrating through the area, visiting our water drip. Super cool to see so close and out in the open like that. And then in the middle here, these little dots, I know it's not that impressive to look at, but those are actually anhingas, which are this weird cormorant bird that's found throughout the southeastern United States. These are the birds that we were practicing counting with, counting by tens and whatever. And we're always calibrating with Dane and Libby because they're the most experienced at counting. And upper right here is a weird pig-like animal called a javelina. We had little family groups of them around the Hawkwatch platform every day, just about. Below that and to the left, this yellow bunting-like bird is called a dickcissel, fairly common bird out east in grasslands. They migrate through South Texas in pretty big numbers. We had a lot of these flying over early on in the season. And on the right, of course, is a northern cardinal, bird that I actually hadn't seen before until I got there. So that was pretty cool. Of course, they got old fairly quickly. So September is usually our biggest month at the watch. That's usually when we get like 100,000 bird day, or that's like when we get up to about half our average. So our average is about 600,000 birds. So usually by the end of the month, we should have about 300,000. Well, that wasn't the case this season, and I'll get to that. The other thing that makes September special is the celebration of flight, which happens the last weekend of every September there. It's basically, as the name suggests, a cool little like street fair with presentations and food vendors and stuff all there for the hawk migration. And a bunch of people are there at the Hawkwatch platform hoping to see the big kettle. We ended up with a pretty big kettle of broadwings on the last day of the flight, something like 5,000 birds, but still not quite the numbers that we should have been seeing at that time, which really was kind of the trend of my season there. Mississippi Kites finally surpassed average after being about 10 days into September, which is super unusual. And it took a 4,000 bird day to get above average. And that was super cool to see, but we were definitely worried there about the kites. But they finally came in on that day and saved the average. And then I also had my first 5-digit days, which I think we had several days of 20,000 or so broadwing hawks mainly. Diversity overall for migratory raptors ramps up. So towards the end, we started seeing more sharp-shinned hawks, more falcons like peregrines and kestrels coming through, and even some other oddities, kind of like this zone-tailed hawk here, which is a real good imitator of turkey vultures. They actually hide out in turkey vulture kettles so they can sneak up on prey. But as with everything in South Texas, migration was really ramping up across all the boards. Anhingas, pelicans, storks, even hummingbirds, we started seeing a huge markup of them. I think we were reporting sometimes 100 plus hummingbirds in a day, of like 4 or 5 different species. We, believe it or not, they actually get black chins and rufus and calliope through there, which is really cool. And then songbird migration, of course, ramped up. Here's a nice picture of all the hummingbirds swarming our feeders. And then on the right here is a picture of a kettle of Mississippi kites. So yeah, here's some of my favorite one of my favorite songbird groups, orioles. We ended up with 4 species that month. We had this in the middle here is a beautiful female orchard oriole. On the right here is a southwestern species, hooded oriole, a male. And then on the bottom middle here is a beautiful male Baltimore oriole, very common, basically the eastern US's counterpart to our Bullock's oriole. And then to the left is the Audubon's oriole, which is a South Texas bird. They're not often in the Corpus Christi area. They're usually a bit farther west, but this bird decided to show up at the Hawkwatch one day, and it was real cool to actually get that species at the Hawkwatch. This was actually my lifer Audubon, so it was real cool. Here's some more migrants, rufus hummingbird here on the left. This was another fun one that we got tons of, especially in September, was scissor-tailed flycatcher, basically a kingbird with a really long tail. And I think there was one day we had 100 plus that we counted going over the watch. Here's a closer picture in the upper right. Bottom left is another one of those South Texas birds, olive sparrow. They kind of have like a bouncing ball kind of like call. Usually really secretive, so it was nice to actually get one photo of one while I was there. This one came out to our feed. And then in the middle here is a migrant called yellow-bellied flycatcher, an eastern Epidinax flycatcher essentially. And then on the bottom right here is one of our local peregrine falcons with a killdeer in its talons, that we actually watched go down and get from the pond below the Hawkwatch platform. So yeah, all kinds of kettles in September. In the upper left here, we have a big group of Anhingas. Bottom left, we have a decent sized group of American white pelicans. And then in the upper right here is what most people are there to see is a big kettle of broad-winged hawks. This was, I think, during that 5,000 bird day on the last day of the celebration of flight. So I know a lot of people probably wonder, how do we count this mess of birds? Well, the answer is we don't count it when there are a mess of birds like this. We wait for them to kettle up like this, and then what they'll do is they'll stream, which is kind of hard to see in this bottom photo, but if you look closely, they all kind of line up, and you can really see what kind of hawk watching we're dealing with down there. That's one of the gripes about Corpus Christi hawk watch, if there is ever was one, is that the viewing isn't always the best, but the numbers are always there. But yeah, so you can see down here in the bottom, they all kind of line up a bit, and that's when we're with our clickers and counting, and before they move on and kettle up again. Um, so October, or as we like to call it, Rocktober, is usually our most diverse month. That's when we start getting all the oddities and, like, you know, diversity overall with migrant raptors really ramps up. We start seeing like more weird things like prairie falcons, um, and more merlins, and our accipiter, and like sharpshins and Cooper hawk numbers really start going up, and kestrel numbers start going up, and so we're starting to see, like, every day counting 10 or more species of raptors. um, Broadwing hawks usually ramp down by the middle of the month, but that wasn't the case this time. So actually, what ended up happening in October is we got our peak in October about 9 days after the celebration of flight, and it really wasn't quite the full on peak that they're usually used to, but it was still quite impressive. It was 2 days of about 40,000 birds. It was insane, and I have a couple of videos of it next. But October ended up being our most numerous month. Um, September, I think we ended up with only under 100,000 birds, which is super unusual. And then October, I think we finished with nearly 200,000. So really weird. And that seemed to be the whole trend of the season. Um, and then the other cool thing that happened in the beginning of October is we had a 72 peregrine falcon day. It was the biggest single day for peregrine falcons in watch history. Believe it or not, it's actually kind of a small number relative to other hawk watches in the country, but really big for Corpus Christi and that far south. So that was really cool. We actually had a couple groups of peregrine falcons, actual groups of them, where we were seeing five at a time together flying overhead. It was really crazy. And then we had our own, I think, one of two short-tailed hawks in October. This one was the one that we got the best looks at, and that was during a 16 migrant raptor day. So we ended up, what I mean by that is we counted 16 different species of raptors, which was crazy. That was also an amazing day for sharpshins and coopers and kestrels. I think we ended up with like 200 plus kestrels, and we were counting until sunset essentially, which never happens. We ended the day with a group of 7 kestrels going by. Super cool. The second half of October ended up being a lot cooler for Texas. Anyway, we got a lot of rain and even some flooding. Um, and as I said here, the second half is also when turkey vultures start really coming in and peaking, Swainson's hawks as well. And the weird thing is we were still, all the way until the end of October, was still seeing 4-digit days of broad-winged hawks, which is totally unusual. They usually wind down about the middle of the month. Um, but that was kind of just seemed to be the trend that season. Anyway, so here on the right, we have a nice selection of our various broad-winged hawk forms. In the upper left here, we have an adult broad-winged hawk, light morph. You can see it's kind of a squattier hawk um, with a white band, single white band in the tail, some barring down the front. You can see on the bottom left here that that's an adult perched. And then in the upper right here is a juvenile first year broad-winged hawk with some streaking down the side and a kind of hooded appearance. Again, kind of a smaller, stockier hawk. And then on the bottom right is what we call chocolate drop. It's an adult dark morph broad-winged hawk. These guys stand out like sore thumbs in those massive kettles. So they're just little chocolate drops. And we actually keep tabs on these. Just to see out of pure curiosity, the numbers to, compare to other hawk watches. So I don't know what will come of that data, but it's kind of interesting. So here it is. This is the big day. This is what people come down to Corpus Christi to see, and people from all over. They basically have like hawkwatch groupies that come every season for these big kettles of birds, just for hawks, and they're all excellent hawk watchers. One of them, named Peter Collins, actually runs the Tubok Hawk Watch in Arizona, which counts common Blackhawks. But yeah, as you can see here, this right here, I think was about 6,000 birds. I think just a small portion of the 40,000 that we had that day. Yeah, and so here is the kettle streaming. This is when we are counting the birds. Might be kind of hard to hear, but there's people in the background furiously clicking right now, trying to get a count on these birds. We often try to have more than one person counting, so we can compare numbers and kind of average it out a little bit, because it's obviously not exact, especially in these situations where they're streaming really fast and we have to count by like tens or even more than that sometimes. I think there was at one point where I watched Dane click by 500s because the stream was so massive. I think that was during a big Mississippi kite day. But yeah, here's on the left here is another video of some kettling. This was towards the second half of October, where the kettling kind of got a little bit lazier because of how cool it was. And this is mostly composed of turkey vultures, broad-winged hawks, and Swainson's hawks. Kind of hard to tell, but this is what, it was kind of hard to count these kettles because they actually didn't really stream. They kind of just swirled about and then they just kept swirling south. But because of how slow they were, we could get counts on them. And then on the right here is some of that flooding I was talking about. It actually flooded the whole bottom lower area of the park. I think I forgot to mention, but out here by that tree line is the Nueces River, which goes into Corpus Christi Bay. But yeah, it flooded and overflowed in here, which made for Lake Hazel, as we called it. We actually had quite a few cool waterfowl show up there, including a Lee Screeb, which is unusual that far north in South Texas. They're real common down farther south, like in the Rio Grande Valley. But yeah, here's some more of my favorite hawks from then. In the upper left here, you might be able to make out from some field marks there that it's a golden eagle. Not the best photo, but it was the only golden eagle of the season. Don't get many eagles down there. Usually one or two golden eagles and only a few bald eagles. But yeah, you can see kind of the little white patches and the big wedge-shaped tail of a golden eagle. And then on the left here, some really, really late swallow-tailed kites that we actually had in October. Super weird, but like I've been saying, it was the whole theme of the season was everything was late. In the middle here is a white-tailed hawk. This is one of the resident hawks in the area usually, but some do migrate through. This bird was actually released by a local rehabber, and it landed right in front of the tree in front of us and gave us some really great views. But yeah, this rehabber would come and release some, whatever, some random hawk there every few weeks. It seemed like we had like they released a caracara broad-winged. Yeah, and then on the bottom here we have red-shouldered hawk, one of our resident birds. And then on the right here, I'm sure some of you might be familiar with that white-headed and white tail appearance. That is a bald eagle. It's actually perched on a big snag out along the Nueces River. This, believe it or not, may have actually been the first photo of a bald eagle perched within the park there. They often only fly over and they're gone as soon as we see them. So it was really cool to actually have one hang around for a bit. Here's some more of my favorite locals that I was seeing around the park there. Wide-eyed vireo in the upper left. Some wood storks flying by here. We actually had some huge numbers of these go by in October. I think we had like one group of 500. It was really crazy. And then right here, we have a buff-bellied hummingbird. Just wanted to add a better photo. And then northern mockingbird here, pretty common southern species. And then here's another South Texas specialty. It's the southern Texas counterpart to the eastern red-bellied woodpecker. This is the golden-fronted woodpecker. It's only found in the southern half of Texas. Really pretty woodpecker. And then in the left here was, I think, one of the perks of having that wetland form down below the platform is we got lots of marsh birds. My friend Daniel, one of the other counters, and I watched this great egret actually take down a sora and attempt to eat it, but it eventually had to drop it because it couldn't swallow it. It was pretty crazy. So November, basically we just have 2 weeks, ends the 15th. My friend Daniel and I were able to spend time at the Rio Grande Valley Birding Festival, which I'll share some highlights from that next during that month. And then something else I noted was that butterfly migration really ramped up. We actually started seeing some good numbers of monarch butterflies. There was like 3 or 4 days straight where we had millions and millions of these little butterflies called American snouts. They literally filled the sky, and it was honestly hard to hawk watch because you were wondering if you were looking at a butterfly or a hawk out in the distance. But it was super cool to see. The last day, kind of a testament to how everything was running late that season, was possibly the biggest last day in watch history. We had 3,000 turkey vultures, 129 red-tailed hawks, which it was the record for red-tailed hawks in a single day. We don't get a lot of red-tailed hawk migration that far south, so it's really amazing to get triple digits anytime down there. It was really cool. And even still had triple digit broadwings into November, which is unreal. A lot of those broadwings should have already been in Central America by this point, even further south. So it's just crazy. And then, so as I've been saying, we've kind of been running below average the whole season. It was really just the broad-winged hawks that were below average. We were about half of where we needed to be for broad-winged hawk. We had, I think, 330,000 total birds for the season, when we should have been at 600,000 at least. So a weird season, but I'm still really glad I got to go there, and everything was amazing. Even though I didn't get to see 100,000 bird day, even though I really, really wanted to. I can't even imagine it with a 40,000 bird day. But anyway, the bottom left here, we got Couch's kingbird, similar to our kingbirds up here, but a bit greener. He's actually with a monarch butterfly in its beak. In the upper middle here is a Harris's hawk. Something that was also kind of cool about the watch was seeing weird species comparisons. Like I remember seeing a sharp-shinned hawk flying along with a Harris's hawk, something I didn't think I would see together really in any other normal circumstance. Um, and then in the middle here is a black vulture, similar to the turkey vultures, but these guys actually lack a sense of smell, so they rely on the turkey vultures to find their prey or their scavenged carcass or whatever. And then in upper left here, we have Inca doves huddling up, um, because it's November and it actually got a little bit chilly in Texas for once. No more humidity, which was super nice. And the bottom right here is another white-tipped dove. So I mentioned already that I got to go to the Rio Grande Birding Festival with my friend Daniel, one of the other counters. We went for 2 days. Super cool because we kind of had an inn. We actually stayed with one of the leaders of the festival, and the person that we were actually living with through the whole season, who lives right by the Hawk Watch, Clay Taylor, is a Swarovski salesperson. So he actually loaned us out some Swarovski binoculars for the season, which was really cool. And because he was a vendor at the festival, we actually got to meet a lot of the speakers there at the festival. Like we met John Dunn, which was super cool. It was just really awesome how interconnected everybody was there, and it was cool to get to meet these people. But one of probably the best bird of my whole time there was this roadside hawk down here on the bottom left. Um, I guess it's only fitting that I was there for a hawk watch and me and my friend find a rare hawk. We were going to the National Butterfly Center just to chase a varied thrush, believe it or not, which we ended up not seeing, but a rare bird for Texas nonetheless. And then because I wanted to go chase a rare butterfly, we ended up on this other side of the butterfly center and we spotted this hawk and we just couldn't believe it. It was a roadside hawk and we got the word out, but unfortunately it flew away before everybody could see it. But it was, we fell on top of the world there for a couple days during the festival. Apparently there had been one hanging out in the area and it had only been seen by like a few people and they weren't even really sure where it was, or the details of it were kind of shaky. And then we finally confirmed it, and then a couple days later it was refound and a bunch of people got to see it then. But yeah, I think there's only less than 10 records of roadside hawk in the US. It's usually a Mexican species. So it was really cool. We also got to see a golden crown warbler. I didn't get a photo of it, but another Mexican species that sometimes shows up down there in extreme southern Texas. Just a really cool and fun time. Up here in the middle was a mass booby that was on South Padre Island, which is right off the coast of the Rio Grande Valley, essentially. And we walked out on the end of the pier and I took this picture with my cell phone. In the upper right here, we have a Perluxia, basically the desert's version of northern cardinal. In the middle here, we have the apple motto falcon, a crummy photo of one on a nesting platform. They're actually working to reintroduce this species because it's actually they're breeding them because it went extinct in the U.S. and it's an endangered species now. But their reintroduction program is going really well, and you can see quite a few of them along the coast of Texas. Here in the middle, we have a weird bird called a plain chachalaca. It's in the guan family, and it's the only representative in the U.S. And it just barely makes it up in the Rio Grande Valley. So it's super cool to see these funky birds, very common down there. And then on the bottom right here is a least grebe, the smallest grebe in the US, and pretty common down in the Rio Grande Valley. So I've already kind of hinted at here is the birding around the hawkwatch in South Texas is amazing. The Rio Grande Valley and South Padre Island were only 2 hours away, so I was going there a lot on my days off. A lot of amazing bird life there, a lot of specialties that you can't see anywhere else in the US. And plus, this was during migration, so I got to see a lot of warblers. My 500 lifer was actually a Canada warbler, and that was seen at Pollywog Ponds, which is just right around the corner from the hawkwatch. Even Corpus Christi had a couple little parks that were packed with birds in late October. We were seeing like 15 species of warbler, which I guess it's even crazier in the spring. But that'll be for another time. I got to go on a pelagic as well, which was really cool, off of South Padre Island. But yeah, here's some of my favorites here. I threw in some insects. So over here on the right is American snout. This is what I saw flying by the millions for a few days in November. In the bottom center here is a roseate skimmer. Really beautiful pink dragonfly. Bottom left here is a male hooded warbler in Blucher Park, pretty much right downtown Corpus Christi. And then here is a tricolored heron. Another fun thing about Texas is all the heron diversity. And then up on the right is a real dinosaur. No, it's a groove-billed Ani, which is in the cuckoo family. Kind of a bizarre looking bird, but real cool. And then in the middle here is a magnificent frigate bird, pretty common off the coast of Texas. And then on the bottom right is chestnut-sided warbler. So I've already kind of shared some from the Rio Grande Valley, but these are from my days off. So in the upper left here is a beautiful plain chachalaca at one of my favorite spots called the Estero Llano Grande State Park. It's basically a combination of ponds and tropical forest. It's real cool. Super birdie there. I think there were several times where I'd get 80 plus species in a visit. Bottom left here is another one from there, a black-bellied whistling duck, but these are very common throughout southern Texas. They were all over at the watch too, but Llano Grande, I think I had like 3,000 birds at one point. It was crazy, and they're super loud and noisy. Another loud and conspicuous bird is this bird right here in the middle, called a great kiskadee. It's kind of like our kingbirds, a close relative of them. Super noisy, very beautiful bird though. And to the right of that is an inhinga. This is what they actually look like when they're not little dots in the sky flying by at hundreds at a time. Also known as a snake bird. Down on the bottom, another South Texas specialty, clay-colored thrush or clay-colored robin. This was at the National Butterfly Center. In the upper right here is an Altamira oriole, kind of similar to our Bullock's oriole, but a bit bigger. I think their orange is a little bit different, but my photo doesn't really do it justice. On the right here is a long-billed thrasher, yet another South Texas bird. And even yet another one is the common parake down here in the bottom right, which is this big, huge nightjar, a relative of our common nighthawks. These guys roost on the ground in Estero Llano Grande, and they're real big and actually really hard to spot, but super cool nightjar. The other place down in South Texas that's real special is South Padre Island. It's a barrier island, and it's basically a bunch of woodlots and mangroves, and makes for great places to look for migrants. Also, because of the mangroves and wetlands, you get all these cool water birds. Like here's a little blue heron on the boardwalk at the South Padre Island Nature Center. To the right of that is a white ibis, also on the boardwalk. We saw quite a few of these by the hawkwatch as well, but got my best looks down there for sure. To the right of that is perhaps one of the most sought after birds in the Southeast anyway, is painted bunting, a male painted bunting. Because it was migration, They were literally dependent on these little plots of land on the island before they head south over the Gulf of Mexico. And this guy was, and like several others were like literally feeding at my feet. It was so cool to see him so close and well like that. And then on the right, we have a roseate spoonbill, a funky heron. There's another real common bird down there, but I couldn't get enough of them. The bottom left here is American alligator. This guy was probably about 10 foot long. This was at the South Padre Island Nature Center again. To the right of that is a bird that you shouldn't see in Texas. It's called white-crowned pigeon. It's actually a bird of the Florida Keys and the Caribbean islands. But this guy got blown off course and ended up on South Padre Island, and I was fortunately able to see it on one of my days off. Real funky big pigeon with a big white crown on it. And then on the right, here's a vermilion flycatcher, pretty widespread southern desert species, but another favorite of mine. Of course, when people think of Texas, they also think warblers, and there were plenty of those. Even though it was fall, so not exactly peak warbler time, I ended up seeing 20 or so species, I think, while I was there. So kind of give you a quick rundown here. In the upper left here, we have the prothonotary warbler. The middle here is, our American redstart. The bottom is a black and white warbler. In the middle up here is northern water thrush. In the upper right is a magnolia warbler. Middle bottom here is a northern parula. This guy was actually feeding with those painted buntings that I saw. And then on the right here is a weird thrush-like warbler called the ovenbird. And my last slide here is my friend. I made a really good friend in Daniel, and we decided that we would go on a little road trip after the Hawkwatch and get some more of those Texas specialty birds that I wasn't able to get while I was working there. And he knew where to go. So he took me around and got better looks at Apple Motto Falcon up here. That's a much better photo. Real beautiful falcon. And I'm glad they're reintroducing them and they're doing so well. To the right of that is a yellow-throated warbler that I saw on the beach on Mustang Island, right off the coast of Corpus Christi. We went over to East Texas to try and get into some pine habitat to get some of the specialties that are over there, and also get some of those eastern birds that don't quite come as far south as Corpus Christi. Like, we didn't have any blue jays in Corpus Christi, but I had blue jays in East Texas. One of those is pine warbler right here. And then to the right of that, you may have already recognized it, is a whooping crane, a bird that's also coming back from extinction. You can see how big they are compared to our sandhill crane here on the right. In the lower left, we have a red-headed woodpecker, a woodpecker that I was hoping to meet with before I left the state. And then to the right of that is a red cockaded woodpecker, another one that I was hoping to see. After I'd seen those two, I only needed one more woodpecker in the US, which I got a couple years ago. And then to the right of that is a really special rare bird called a fork-tailed flycatcher. It's basically an eastern kingbird on steroids. They're what's known as an austral migrant. So instead of migrating south for the winter, they migrate north for the winter. So these guys breed in extreme, like South America, and sometimes they overshoot and end up in the US. A big miss for them, but and they're often only one-day wonders. So when Daniel and I heard about this, we booked it over like 3 hours across the state over to back to by Houston, and we're able to see it before it got dark, and it was well worth the drive over because it was gone the next day. And then we even got over to West Texas, and here's a burrowing owl and a prairie dog together. This was out by Lubbock. So yeah, thank you everybody for logging on. this has been fun. This is really cool. I'm glad I got to share all of this.
Well, thank you, RJ. That was excellent. Greatly appreciate it.
You're welcome. It was fun.
Yes.
That was really, yeah.
You know, I had a question.
Yeah.
With the high numbers that they were getting at the very end of the Hawk Watch, does that indicate that the numbers were just late? And if they had, maintained
Um,
the watch,
we,
it would have been.
well, we wondered that. Dane and Libby, since they live there, they kept watching afterwards. They actually still had big numbers of vultures and stuff after we left. Um, because it was after the official count period, they couldn't count it. So they want to make sure that, there's not skewing any statistics when they're looking at long-term data and not trying, so they have to keep it within that time frame. Um, but they actually still had big, like, kettles of turkey vultures coming through, like, into like November, and it was just bizarre, honestly. I just remember them talking about it all the entire time, like, right now we should be counting like 50,000 broad-winged hawks, at the end of September. We should be like, in the whole end of September, we were like constantly waiting, like, when's it gonna come? When is the dam gonna break? And we're gonna be furiously clicking, and it just like never really came. And then it wasn't until like 9 days into October that we had those two huge days. And relatively speaking, they weren't actually that big compared to years previous. I mean, um, the year before actually was the lowest number count they've ever had. So they were really worried because they were like, okay, are the numbers going to rebound? What's going on? And they did. I mean, we weren't the lowest count. I think we were still like third or fourth away from the lowest, but we it was a little concerning. We were like, what was going on? And I've actually kind of been following my friend Daniel. I mentioned him. He's done the Hawk Watch the past 2 years, or the 2 years after as well, and numbers have gone right back up to average. They're about 600,000 now. I think last season they had 600,000. Still, the broadwing hawk peak quite still isn't back to where it was before that lowest year. Um, don't know why or when they'll have another 100,000 bird day, but I know if I'm around in late September down there, I'm going to try and see if I can get a part of that, because
Sure.
I really want to experience that, because I just can't imagine, 5 times potentially than more than what I saw, like, in a single day. It boggles my mind. And even crazier is during that million bird season, they had one day with 500,000 birds in a single day. They had 200,000 bird hours. They had
That's
to have,
spectacular.
yeah, they had to have like 10 people. Since this was peak, there was a lot of actual hawk watchers there available, so they were able to actually get good counts on these birds. But man, it was just so crazy.
Hmm.
But
I had a couple questions.
yeah.
RJ, you said that a resident bird like a red tail would go up and greet the migrants, and want to hear a little more about why would they do that. And then the other thing was, do they ever just take photographs to count?
Mm.
I mean,
Um,
to try to, because I cannot imagine clicking away live.
yeah, I've wondered that too. I don't know. That's a good question with the photographing. Honestly, that's really kind of a hard thing to do, because the distance on these birds I mentioned is like can be really challenging. Like, I found out, like, when I first couple weeks for me was actually quite a struggle. I didn't realize how hard it was to actually hawk watch. Like, I mean, especially at a place like that where, the birds, weren't flying by you like at a ridge line. On a ridge line, a lot of times birds are flying by eye level. They're, however many feet up. And so you're really reliant on impression. You're also need to be really skilled at spotting birds. So it took me a while to get my hawk watching eyes essentially and actually be spotting these birds at a distance. So I can imagine with photography, if there was one of these kettles that are way out, which happened a lot during that season, they were way out and you can just see just a kettle in the distance and you're just like, you have to, and you only have so much time to react before they stream and they're gone. And so we try and make sure that we're counting them before they are out of the area. So photography would be challenging in that regard. And then as far as the raptors going up to greet them, I think, there's just these birds that are just territorial. They were there for the breeding season, or this is where they overwinter. And I think some species of raptors are territorial on their wintering grounds. And I can imagine it might be a little overwhelming seeing all these hawks coming right into their territory. And I don't know. I mean, it's real. There's probably a whole nother thing to look into there about that. But yeah, I mean, we would just watch we'd spot like some migrant sharpshins or coopers going by, right? And then we would see the red tail and we would see it go all the way up and it would chase these birds until they left. Just territorial birds, I guess. It's, and since it is so far south, I mean, who's to say those birds aren't going to breed again even that early, especially like red tails and stuff, they breed early up here anyway, even up at this latitude. So down there, there could be birds that are just trying to set up shop again for another breeding season. So
you think that they would get desensitized after the 10,000th?
Yeah. Well, we've seen some pretty bold like white-tailed hawks that would go after kettles. Like they just like they think they can handle a kettle. Like I don't know. They would go up there, fly around with the kettle, and it's like, what are you doing, bird? You're not. It's it's interesting. I think the white-tailed hawks definitely are breeders there. I mean, there was a pair that was there the whole season. Yeah. So.
Okay. Well, it's about 8:15, so I guess we should wrap it up. But thank you so much, RJ. That was terrific, and maybe we can have you back at some point with a new adventure.
Sure. Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Okay. Good night, everybody.